Hey, welcome. We're glad you're here and part of our Kidmin Training To Go. We are excited for this first inaugural Kidmin Training To Go, and we want to welcome all of you that are joining us here live. I realize that some of you are going to be watching this via video, maybe a couple weeks down the road or tomorrow or another time. We want to welcome all of you that are here for this training. The Kidmin Training To Go, the purpose of this training is to provide 8 sessions for your churches in various areas of kids ministry. And today and tonight we have with us Philip Hahn. He is with us from Bridge Church in Waukesha, a veteran children's pastor. We're excited to hear from him tonight. He's going to be talking about classroom management. Now, those of you that are joining us, you're joining us live via YouTube Live, and you can join us and chat with us and ask questions anytime. If you just want to tell us, hey, we're here, tell us your name, we're glad that you're here. So go ahead and do that at any time. Join in on the chat area. We're going to have Philip here with us. He has a presentation. It is about 45 minutes, a little bit less than that. And he is going to be talking about classroom management. You know, one of the things that people always ask me about is, Mark, they say, hey, Mark, how do we do classroom management? How do we make sure that my class runs smoothly? And it's probably one of the top 3 things that people ask for training on. So we're kicking it off with that here tonight. Philip has created a video, so you'll be able to enjoy that. We have created a set of notes for this. And Phil, I don't even think I told Philip this. I forgot to tell him this, that we created a set of notes for this. And I have, I can show you, I think I have it right here. Yeah. If you wanted to download those notes, you can do that at go.wnmdag.org/KTTG1. And you can download the notes from tonight's session.
Take a screenshot of your computer now.
Yeah, and I may be able to. I'll throw it into the chat area too, so that you can download it right from there in just a few minutes. So we'll get that going. So we're glad you're part of this tonight, and I'll hide this for now, and we'll put it back up in the chat area in just a couple of minutes. If you have any questions, we're going to have a question and answer period at the end. So feel free to ask any questions that you would like. Anytime you can ask those questions, and we'll make sure that we get your questions answered. I'd like to pray, open us in prayer. So let's do that, and then we'll get going on this session on classroom management. Lord, I thank you that tonight, that as we come together and talk about training and ministering to boys and girls, I pray that you would help us to see that there are skills and tools and attitudes and things that we can do to have a classroom that is managed so that we can disciple boys and girls. I pray that you would open our hearts, open our ears, Lord Jesus, to hear what you have for us tonight. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So we're glad you're here with us tonight, and we're going to get ready, and we're going to start the video here in just 1 second. We're going to load it up, and here's Philip.
Hello there, and welcome to this session. We're going to be talking about classroom management. Let me just take a brief moment to introduce myself. I am Philip Hahn. I have been a children's pastor for over 20 years. And I've worked in every imaginable environment, from big auditoriums to small classrooms And so just give you a little context of where I come from. I've been in children's ministry all my life. And I know a little bit about what to do in a room full of kids. I think sometimes when we think of classroom management, what we think about is how do I get the kids to listen to what I'm saying? And I think maybe a healthier way to look at it is how do I give them something that they want to consume? And if you take it from that perspective, not what can I get them to do for me, but what can I do for them, it'll change the way you do classroom management. And it'll increase the amount of listening and retention and behavior that they're able to give you, but it'll also increase your effectiveness in whatever it is you are trying to provide to them. So let's get started. Classroom management. First, let's go over what doesn't work. Now, chances are you've probably done some of these. You might even be doing some of these right now. Now, don't lose hope if what you do is on this list. But I think if you're listening to this, chances are you're asking the question, why is what I'm doing not working? Well, let's start with what you shouldn't do. First of all, yelling. Just raising your voice to yell above the noise of the room is not an effective way to reduce the noise in the room. Yelling at the kids is not going to get them to quiet down. It might gain their attention for a moment, but chances are if you're yelling things like, settle down, be quiet, get back into your seats, that's not something you can sustain long term. That's not something you can shout every 20 minutes, every single week. It's just not an effective way to get their attention, to get them to do what you're asking them to do. Just telling them what to do or what not to do, especially with a raised voice, is really just for them the white noise that they get all day, every day in a classroom or in their home with their parents, and you just become part of that white noise. Another thing that does not work is threats. Now, threats is different than laying out expectations. Laying out expectations is if we do this, then we get that. If you do this, this is the consequence. Beforehand. Threats in the moment are, you guys be quiet or we're not going to get snacks today. Settle down or we're just going to skip the video and do craft instead. If you're in the moment trying to create a consequence that deters misbehavior, they can see through that. They can feel, you don't have my best interests in mind. You're just trying to get what you want out of me. Another thing that does not work is punishment. Punishment is different than follow-through consequences. Okay, follow-through consequences is, okay, we said that if you talk, you can't sit next to your friends and we're going to have to move you to a different seat. That's a consequence that was stated ahead of time, an expectation. A punishment is, that's unacceptable. Go sit in the corner. Or, I'm sorry, we can't deal with that right now. We're calling mom. Or something that embarrasses them in front of the group. All right, everybody look at what so-and-so just did. Everybody look. This is the kind of behavior that is unacceptable. You know, when you embarrass somebody or call them out or do something that makes them feel bad about themselves, that's a punishment. Another thing that does not work is scolding. Scolding is different than verbal correction. Verbal correction informs them of the mistake, informs them of the consequence, informs them of how they can improve or what they did right, but scolding is kind of tied to shaming. It's saying you are less than I expect, and therefore your value is less than you are. Things like, I've had it, or why are you being bad? Why aren't you like so-and-so? I give up on you. You will just never pay attention, will you? You know, those degrading statements, those scolding statements, just deflate a kid, and they don't want to listen to people who are going to deflate them. They want to listen to people who are going to uplift them. And if you've tried any of these, whether it be yelling or threats or punishment or scolding, it does not mean you're a bad teacher. It just means you've been trying something that doesn't work. And I'm going to try to give you some things that will work a little bit better than that. So let's move into some of the things that do work. Now, this next session, this next portion is what I believe is the key, the absolute most important. That's why I'm putting it at the beginning of this talk, because I think if you can get a hold of this, 90% of your disciplinary problems will be solved. It is the key that most people just don't remember is so vitally important to classroom management. They perceive it as a teaching. They don't perceive it as classroom management. And that's why I want to get this through your head. Really, 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 really important. Preparation and presentation. It's not managing the behavior that's the problem. It's you giving them something that they're interested in. You put on a good show for them, or they will put on a good show for you. If you don't prepare something dynamic, they can tell. They get bored. You can't get upset with a child for acting like a child. They're not acting out because they're misbehaving. 90% of the time, they're acting out because they're bored. And if they're bored, it's not their fault. We need to give them something dynamic and interesting. It needs to be well prepared. And there's some keys to helping that happen. The first of which is, this is the main event, the number one key to discipline. Most kids act out because they're bored. If they're bored, it's not their fault. So here's what you have to do: prepare. You need to wrap your head around something. Gone are the days when an hour before class you are opening up the book to see what you need to do today. You should be praying about this and digesting it all week long. You should have had your supplies ready long before the day of your ministry, because if they see you organizing your supplies, they know you're not ready. If the first time you are reading that lesson is an hour before you get up in front of the kids, you are not going to be able to give them something that you've digested, that you know, that you can give them in your own words, because when you have those pauses, yeah, see, even now, your attention just wandered. When you have those moments where you're trying to collect your supplies for the next thing that you've got to bring up onto stage, all the kids now have to decide where to put their attention, because watching you get ready is not going to entertain them. So if you're not prepared ahead of time with all of your supplies laid out, ready to go, they are going to fill that void, those pauses, those moments where you're searching for your words, those times when you're waiting for the next segment to come up. They're going to get that sense of, there's nothing going on, I need to create something to do. You have to prepare ahead of time. Every portion of your lesson. And if you teach with other people in an environment where multiple presenters are present, you have to make sure that all of them are also prepared and ready for whatever it is they're doing. Second thing is that you need to give them something dynamic. You cannot be a talking head in front of them. You cannot stand in front of them and just read something. You can't just get up there and tell them a story. It's just not interesting to a kid whose eyes and ears are used to constant streaming, high quality stimulation. You have to give them something to look at, something to do, something to involve them, or they will not be able to engage in what you're doing. Just talking is a guarantee that they are not going to hear anything you say. So you have to have something dynamic. You have to have use object lessons, use puppets, use skits, use crafts, use games, use things that involve them, that excite them, that interest them, because if you don't, they're going to act out in natural ways. Prepared and dynamic. Next, eliminate those pauses and dead time. Eliminate pauses and dead time. You do that best by having something dynamic, well prepared, but you have to actually pay attention to it when you're speaking, and especially if you have more than one presenter in the room, whether you co-teach with another person in a Sunday school classroom or if you're in a kids' church room with 3 or 4 teachers, you have to be able to know that there's not going to be a pause. When you are doing a game, if you've only got 4 kids out of the room playing a game on the stage in front of everybody, you can't let dead time happen. You can't say, okay, I'm going to explain it to these 4 kids while the rest just kind of watch. You have to address the kids. Oh, and now I'm going to do a running commentary on who's winning, who's losing, who just passed the ball fastest, and who do you think is going to win? Let's cheer for the girls. You know, you have to have constant sound, or else they're going to see that as an open gate for their attention to wander into other areas or distract themselves with somebody next to them. So you need to eliminate those pauses. Eliminate that dead time. When you are well prepared, you can tell the story without pausing to think about what you're going to say, without pausing to go back through your notes and see what you missed. It's okay to miss things in your notes. It is okay to skip things out of the curriculum because you forgot about them. As long as you get the main point across, just keep talking. And when you see their attention wandering, stop talking and move on. Don't let your pauses and dead time give their attention time to wander. That also means that people who are multiple teachers have to watch for that cue that this lesson is wrapping up. I should be gathering my supplies so that I can be waiting in the wings, so that when that person says, all right, what's next, I am less than 2 seconds away from being the next thing on that stage in front of those kids or whatever your environment looks like. You need to be prepared for being the next person on deck, because if they've got to wait for this person to gather their supplies, move out of the way so that the next person can come up and set up their thing, you've already lost them. So that's dead time has to be instantaneous, and that will allow you to retain control over the room without them wandering off and you got to go regather their attention. Another thing, we have now talked about what not to do. We've talked about preparation and presentation, which is the most important. The next most effective means of classroom management is just clear expectations. Clear expectations will solve so many problems. You cannot yell at a kid for not doing something you never told them to do. You can't get upset with a child for doing stuff you never told them was unacceptable. So you have to lay down some clear expectations right at the beginning. And to be honest, those expectations are entirely dependent on your style, your environment, your kids, your resources. So really, you get to write them however you want, as long as they're clear. So communicate the schedule. That's especially helpful for kids with special needs. If you've got kids who are autistic or ADHD, having that schedule, even if it's just verbally stated, and next we're going to do this before we do that. That simple statement will help that kid. How many of you go to a conference, a meeting, or something, and the first thing you look at is the schedule? You're like, I want to know what's next and how long it's going to take and when I'm going to be out of here. Because you need to know what's going to happen so you know how long you have before the next transition. Kids need it even more. So whether you post it on the wall, state it at the beginning in class, or list it on a sheet of paper, whatever you do, make sure that the kids know what to expect when they walk in. Know how long it's going to take. Know when the next thing is going to happen. Know how long it's going to be before their snack or their craft or dismissal. That'll help them process what they're supposed to be doing in the moment. The other thing is to communicate the rules, the expectations of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. As much as possible, try to make those positive. Instead of saying don't talk, frame it in please listen. Instead of don't touch your neighbor, say respect the person next to you. There are positive ways to frame most things. It's like we sit in here instead of saying don't run. So in here, we expect you to listen to the things that are happening in front of you. Respect the person next to you and have fun. So those are just simple, clear expectations so that when a kid is poking the kid next to him, you can say, oh, that's not very respectful to the person next to you. You wouldn't want them poking you. Or when they stand up to walk out of the room, you can say, oh, remember one of our rules was to have a seat? And with those rules are clear consequences as well. So you can say, well, if you forget the rules, number one, we'll remind you. We'll just say, oh, you forgot. We're supposed to sit and listen. And the second consequence is if you still keep doing what we say you can't, you will have to move your chair. Maybe it's the people sitting next to you that are distracting you. We'll just move you to a different seat. Third time, we just talk to your parents and let them know that you are having trouble so that they can help you for next time. So whatever your consequences are, this is just one example of a type of consequence, but if you lay out clear rules and clear consequences, then you can follow through with those and they will know what to expect and they won't feel unfairly judged when you call them out on it. Okay, so we talked about what doesn't work. Preparation and presentation, which is the most important. Clear expectations, now follow through. It's one thing to say the rules. It's a very different thing to follow through. It is uncomfortable to confront people. That is just a fact of life. You will face discomfort when confronting people. And when you want to be friends with the kids and it's a little bit inconvenient or uncomfortable to call them out on every single thing, sometimes you let a few of them slide. Now it's true, you do have to kind of pick your battles, and if a kid just talks to the kid next to him for a couple of seconds to make a comment about what's already going on, they're already engaging, they just wanted to make a comment to their friend about what's happening, yeah, you can pick your battles. You don't have to immediately jump on every single thing, but you can't just let misbehavior continue. You can't just wait until it gets out of hand. If a kid gets up and starts to walk out of the room, you have to say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't do that here. We have to sit and listen, because if you get up and walk out, we don't know where you are. We don't know that you're safe. We have to care for you. So why don't you have a seat, and if you want to, you can raise your hand and maybe then we can let you go. You have to be immediate. One of the environments in which I sometimes teach is Royal Rangers classrooms, which is a mentorship club for boys in which boys gather in a classroom and we have to teach them something. It was in fact just 2 weeks ago that I was teaching them tool craft, which involved how to properly and safely handle knives. Yes, I gave a group of boys sharp knives and taught them how to use it. Do you think I could have any compromise in that environment if a kid decided to try something that I had already said is unsafe? You have to jump on it. That room was safe. That room had clear expectations. And when I saw somebody starting to stray out of the safety zone, I had to say, okay, that action is not safe. Let's call that back in. And I was ready and willing to stop whatever was happening to immediately intervene. And that's the kind of attitude that you have to have in a room, because there's an old principle that it's debatable whether there's scientific merit to it, but it's called the broken window principle. And the theory was that if you want to uplift a community, the first thing you need to do is deal with the small stuff, not the big stuff. Instead of dealing with the murders and the drug trafficking and things like that, you need to focus on the graffiti and the jaywalking and the broken windows in the factory district. If you fix those windows, you're going to tell the community those little things are unacceptable. We don't want vandalism in our town. We don't want broken windows. If it's nothing but broken windows and vandalism all over town, well, all that's going to say is we're willing to compromise. And if you fix the broken windows and the graffiti first, then suddenly those bigger things seem like major things. And so we say, little things, let's nip that in the bud before it gets to be out of hand. And if you can do that, especially with the ringleaders, you know who those ringleaders are in your room that kind of draw the room into chaos. If you can address those immediately and say, I'm not going to let you do that twice. I'm going to address it the first time, so that you know we mean what we say when we say these rules and consequences. That'll help a lot. The other thing with follow through is to restate the expectations that were verbalized. When you're following through, don't just tell them that was unacceptable. State the rule that you've already established ahead of time so that they know what expectation they're supposed to remember next time. It's like, oh, justly bringing you to recall the thing we've already said. So, oh, you can't poke your neighbor. Remember what we said at the beginning. You have to respect others, and I will protect you if other people try to bother you as well. When you restate that expectation, oh, remember when we said at the beginning, the consequence for doing this more than once is to move your seat. I think maybe the people around you might be distracting you, so let's move you to this chair over here, where I think you can pay attention a little better. So you can exchange something that they already understand. It doesn't feel unfair. It doesn't feel like you're picking on them. It feels like you're enforcing something that you've already stated. And kids do crave consistency and honesty with the adult. So if you said, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable, it really brings them much comfort when their authorities follow through with what they said they were going to follow through with. And the last thing in follow-through is how you deliver that message. And I will say the easiest way to establish how you follow through is smile. Kids are already being yelled at school, especially the troublemakers. They're being yelled at home. If they get it at church, they're not going to want to come back. Church should be a safe environment that they want to come back. And so usually, if you can say it with a smile, you're not using your angry face, you're not using your angry voice, you're using your loving voice, your loving face. And so when somebody misbehaves, instead of, that's the angry face, you can give them this face. Sometimes you don't even have to say anything. In fact, usually in my kids' church environment, where all of our kids, kindergarten through 5th grade, are together, that's all I have to do. From the opposite side of the room, I just get their attention and I say, but see, with a smile on your face, you're telling them, I still like you. I'm not angry with you. So if you can say it with a smile, now I'm not saying you should smile if a kid's punching another kid in the face. What I'm saying is when you deliver it with kindness, that smile is just one check in your spirit that'll allow you to say it with kindness so that you don't upset the child and give them another reason to act out. So, we've talked about what doesn't work, preparation and presentation, expectations, and follow through. Here's another tool that you can stick into your toolbox. It's incentives. Incentives are positive things that you can give the kids when they do it right. And you can just out of the gate assume every kid is doing it right and start with reward. That's how God did it. God always blessed before he disciplined. He said, I'm going to give you a blessing on faith that you are going to listen and obey to what I have to say. Now, it didn't always work, and that's why we have the follow through and the rules and the consequences. But grace and gift always precede discipline and punishment. So, there are some keys to doing incentives right. First of all, you have to avoid favoritism. Now, favoritism goes in both directions. Sometimes we favor those well-behaved kids and pile so many rewards on them that the kids who have difficulty behaving feel like they will never measure up to the goody kids. I am not enough. I am not good. I am less than. And we have to be really careful that if we're going to create an environment where there are incentives, that we're not going to show favoritism to those kids who spend extra time being good or came from an environment where being good is a lot easier. You need to make sure that you carefully craft your incentives not to always be putting candy in the lap of the good kids. You need to either give corporate rewards or allow opportunity to focus in on one kid at a time if they behave or don't, instead of just saying every kid that behaves, the goody two-shoes kids. So the opposite can also be true of favoritism, where you always give attention to the kids who are not listening, and the kids who behave all the time kind of get ignored because they're not causing any trouble. Sometimes you focus so much on that kid, like, oh, you know, you misbehave every week, but this week, if you do this or that, you can get a sucker. Well, what about the kid that's been behaving every single week? Where's his sucker, you know? So you can give other options that will not single out a single group or individual for favoritism. So let me show you how to do that. First of all, there's verbal affirmation. Verbal affirmation is an incentive. Kids crave it more than candy and toys. If you can tell a kid, You have value. You did it right. I'm proud of you. You did great today. Sometimes with those troublemaking kids, it's hard to find those nuggets of affirmation that you can praise that. Believe me, one of them lives in my own household. It's easy to sometimes try to wait for that big win of you'd had a great day, but sometimes you need to focus on the little wins like, oh, I noticed that during that one lesson, you were listening the whole time. I'm proud of you. Keep it up. So you give those verbal affirmations. You know what, kids? You have done such a good job today. I am proud of every single one of you. Not one of you disrupted the class today, and we were able to have so much fun. When you give that verbal affirmation to a kid or to a group, it's like candy to their soul. It's much better than handing them a physical incentive. So the best way that you can give some kind of an incentive is just be eager to give that verbal affirmation. But the other thing that you can do is physical incentives. Now, everybody knows these. These are the easy ones. It's candy, it's a treasure chest, it's a secret seat prize. Okay, I've picked out a seat in the room somewhere, and if the person sitting in that chair behaves the whole time and listens, I will give them candy. But you don't know who it is. It might be you, it might be the person next to you, so make sure that you're listening the whole time in case you're sitting in the secret seat. You know, you give them a treasure chest or candy at the end. Now, there is value in doing it that way. It's an old trick, but it works. Kids like candy. They like grabbing something out of the treasure chest. They like getting Bible bucks or Jesus dollars or whatever you do in your room to give them something to look forward to. And it's okay. Sometimes you need that external incentive before it becomes an internal motivation. I used to read my Bible and pray for the prize I'd get in kids' church. But when it became a habit, I found I loved it. And I wanted to read my Bible and pray more, not so that I can get the prize, but because I enjoyed the positive impact it had on my life. And you can do the same thing in your environment. Listening, you may listen just because you want that verbal affirmation or that piece of candy, but eventually it becomes a habit. It becomes what they perceive as normal for the room. So don't be afraid to give out the prizes, but if you are giving out food, make sure you're sensitive to kids' food sensitivities, you know, whether their parents like giving them candy in the day, or some people do, some people don't. But you know your kids and your environment better to know what kind of prizes to give out and how often. But the other thing that a lot of people overlook are called token incentives. So if you're talking about giving kids prizes, you don't have a big budget or you don't want to give them candy, well, there are token incentives. A token incentive is to give the kids something that actually intrinsically has no value. It can be Bible bucks, it can be marbles, it can be a hash line on the chart, it can be stickers. They don't have any intrinsic value. But when you give it value, when you assign it value by saying, hey, look how many stickers so-and-so got on their chart, that gives them that sense of, oh, this is important, this is valuable. Why are Pokemon cards valuable? Is the card stock valuable? Was it the artwork was excellent on the card? What about a baseball card? Is it because that player was a good player that that card is worth so much? No, it's because somebody assigned value to it. Somebody decided, I want that, and I'm willing to pay money for that. And because that person liked it and wanted it and was recognized for it, somebody else says, oh, I want that recognition. I want that joy that they got from that thing. Therefore, I want that more. And now this thing has increased in value, not because of its intrinsic worth, but because people want it. You want it literally because people want it. Now, if you have a jar in your class, and every time we have a good day, we put marbles in the jar. And every time somebody decides to disrupt the class, we remove from the jar. And when the jar gets filled up, we have a pizza party, or everybody gets a piece of candy, or maybe it's Bible bucks. We've got a toy store in the back with cheap little Oriental trading prizes. And oh, you get 5 Bible bucks for answering that question. Good job paying attention. So you give them this meaningless piece of paper that then later they can save up or add up or bring to the back and spend it on cheap toys and prizes, and you can assign the value of those Bible bucks and how many candies or whatever they need and they can get with it. So you can actually spend less money and less effort on the prizes themselves and just hand out the tokens. Whether it's stickers on a chart, hashtags on a chart, marbles, Bible bucks, you don't have to give them anything of value. You have to give them something that recognizes that they did it right. And those can add up to physical prizes later, whether that be a party or a prize from the treasure chest or whatever. But those token incentives have just as much power as the actual candy and toys themselves. All right, so we have talked about what doesn't work, preparation and presentation, expectations, follow through, incentives. This is where we're going to end our time. The last session is what I like to call, yeah, but fill in the blank. Yeah, but you're saying, Pastor Phil, that's all well and good, but I've got this unique exception. And there is no shortage of unique exceptions. You have to pray through what will work in your environment. What we've already described will probably help you manage about 95% of the problems that you'll come across, but there will be that 5% exception. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is that kid. That kid. You know who that kid is. I'm not going to say he's the bad kid because he has worth the same way you had worth when God died for you while you were a sinner. But I will say he is that kid that requires a little extra grace from us. The one that runs. The one that tries to take off his shirt in the middle of church. Maybe it's a kid with special needs. Maybe it's a kid with a rough background who was taught by his environment that misbehavior is the only way to get what you want. But whoever that kid is, there are some things that you can use with that kid. One of which is delayed consequences. Most often, those are the kids that are so disruptive that it kind of halts the progress of the class. And it's okay to immediately address it without immediately correcting it. What I mean by that is, I don't have the time to stop the entire classroom to have a conversation with you about why this is hurtful. I will talk to you later. But right now I have to address it without explaining it. Let me give you an example. So Johnny gets up and starts running around in circles and screaming. And you have to hold him down, put him in a seat and say, listen, this is unacceptable and we're going to have to talk to your mom and dad as soon as we're done here. And maybe mom and dad can help us understand exactly why we have to sit and listen without running and screaming. Could you please come here and sit next to him? Or would you come over here and see if you can find his parents, and then you postpone that consequence for later. This is especially helpful actually with your own kids. But when you have to stop the entire class to address something, sometimes that's not the moment where you have to have that conversation. You have to just defer that to after class or defer that to somebody else. You can delay that consequence. Even though you're addressing the issue immediately, you can delay the consequence for later. You can say, okay, we're going to talk about this later. We're going to talk about the consequence of this kind of behavior. But for right now, just know this is not acceptable and we're going to move on, okay? Now, I'm not saying that that's going to stop the misbehavior, but what I am saying is that the long term, you don't have time to stop and mess with it because you got a whole class waiting for you. So you can delay the consequence even if you're addressing it immediately. The other thing is to bring in the caregiver. Sometimes that's not an option if they were a bus kid or got dropped off at the door. You don't even know who the parents are. I don't know what your circumstance is, but if there is a caregiver who drops that person off, and sometimes that means it's the bus driver or it's the ministry coordinator or it's the neighbor who's bringing the neighborhood kids. But whoever that caregiver is, sometimes you have to get to the point where it's like, we only have 2 teachers in the room. And it's everything we can do to manage the behavior of all those kids that we've got. We want Johnny in class. But the only way that we can do that and still have class is if you sit with him. Or maybe you need to come take him out of the class and talk to him in the hallway to see if maybe he can learn our rules and standards before he can come back in. You can bring in that caregiver and say, listen, we love him, we want him here, please help us to care for him. Sit here with us until he's ready to listen, or explain these rules to him at home so that when he comes in here, he knows the consequences. Or reinforce this after he leaves, that when he has a good day, you give him a reward, or when he has a a challenging day, that you make sure that he gets consequences outside of this room. So bring in that caregiver. Now, there's also the out of control. There are some times that you're just not going to control whatever is happening in the room. And probably the biggest key for out of control, that's the kid who is just screaming. That's the kid who is just sobbing. That is the kid who is just fuming. That is the kid who's tantruming. So the one that is out of control, there's a big key to helping those out of control kids, and that is you cannot reason with emotion. If there is a kid who is out of control, you cannot reason with emotion. There is a phenomenon now, whether you talk about left brain, right brain, front brain, rear brain, it really doesn't matter the anatomy of the human brain. But what I can tell you is this. Let's visualize it this way. The front of your brain is cognitive processing. That's reason. It's problem solving. It's language processing. The front of your brain is where you think and make decisions clearly. The back of your brain is instinct. That's fight or flight. That's emotion. That's survival. That's instinct, reaction, protect myself. And the more emotion that's involved, the less reason you can process. And so if a kid is screaming or tantruming or sobbing, they're working from the back of their brain. They do not have the mental capacity to reason and process an argument. You cannot reason with emotion, so don't ever try. Here's some tricks. If a kid is in that manic state of emotion, it doesn't matter what the emotion is. If they are out of control, you can't say, "What do you need? Let's calm down. Can we move into the hallway?" You can't talk to them with reason. You have to get their brain out of emotion mode into reason mode. And the way you do that is distraction. What color shoes am I wearing? What breakfast did you eat this morning? Those are some random questions that can actually jar somebody out of an emotion like, what does that have to do with anything? And then their brain starts thinking about your shoes or thinking about what they ate for breakfast. And suddenly they had to think and process something that didn't make sense, which draws them out of an emotion and into the frontal cortex. And now you can say, now, what do you want? That type of question now gets them processing of what do I want? So if you can get them out of the emotion through a distraction. My wife likes to do this with suckers. It's like, you know what you need? You need a sucker. Do you want a sucker? I have a little box full of suckers for kids who are willing to talk to me and hang out with me. Would you like to eat a sucker and talk to me? That sucker just pulls them out of the emotion. We don't need to give kids sugar in order to make them behave. What we need to do is get them out of the emotion so that we can talk. It doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't stop the misbehavior, but it gets them out of the emotional state into the I can have a conversation with you mode. So you can never talk to a kid who's emotional until you get past the emotion. So you need to calm the emotion first. The second thing that you can do if a kid is out of control is call for help. Call for help. You're already thinking, I don't have enough help to run the room I've got. Where am I going to get extra help to deal with that kid? Listen, you can call the usher, call the check-in person, call the parent, call in a greeter. You can say to the oldest kid in the room, go get mom. Can you watch the class while I take her to mom? Can you take her to security guard or check-in person or usher or greeter? Could you come in here for a minute and could you just take her to get a drink while I close down the classroom? Or can you just watch the classroom and make sure nobody dies while I take her to go get her mom? You need to call in for help. And it is very, very, very helpful if you ahead of time just designate somebody who can be on your speed dial, on your text message, on the parent page or whatever, that can be that instantaneous come in and address an emergency person. It doesn't have to be a children's ministry volunteer, and it doesn't need to be somebody who's willing to come in every week. It can just be, hey, head usher, hey, pastor's wife, could you just be on call if I need an emergency? Sometimes you need that help so that you can address the situation without destroying the entire class. Then there's kids with special needs. Kids with special needs are a unique bag, and there's way too much material to go through for special needs than I could ever address in a single training session. But the best tools to help with special needs is to recruit a one-on-one buddy for them. If that's a parent, an older child, a teenager, maybe somebody who already is familiar with special needs in the community, in the educational world. There are a lot of resources available for special needs in the school, and sometimes just asking them what advocates they have available to help kids with special needs is a good resource. So having a one-on-one is the best. And even if it's just a disruptive kid who's hyperactive, having one person to sit next to them and be there one-on-one is sometimes the best solution. The other way that I've already described is to bring in the caregiver. We had a kid who was the best runner in my 20 years of ministry. He could bolt out the door and into traffic before the teacher knew he was gone. And so we had to create checkpoints with our safety team around the building where if he got out, we were able to post interceptors at the exits to head him off at the pass. And the solution for him was we could not have him in the classroom and still run a classroom. So we had to ask the parent, hey, we want him in the class. Can you be the person who sits in the class with him? That's not ideal because we want the parents to go into church, but we want that kid in there more. And so if they want to be with that kid and sit with that kid, that'll enable you to do ministry until they're able to manage themselves or until you're able to recruit a one-on-one. And the other one is make a space where they fit. You can have a separate wiggle-giggle room where the parents can watch the service and manage the behavior of their weird challenges, you know. Or you can have a space in the back of the room for pacing. It's like this is where our autistic or our ADHD kids are allowed to walk back and forth. They're allowed to fidget with things. They're allowed to color at this table. They have an activity to keep them busy where they are okay to get up and walk around. And that doesn't have to change the rules of the room. Those kids need that space in order to walk and run. And so we're just going to let them have that space, and it's okay. There's also a fidget corner. You could have a beanbag chair or a coloring table or an environment where they can sit, where they're enclosed by something, a safety tent where the door is open but they feel enclosed and safe and separated from the noise and distraction, where they can focus on a fidget or something like that. Sometimes those are really useful even in the room with the other kids. The other but I had was overwhelming odds. If you are in an environment where you've got 100 kids and one teacher, you need to change the odds. They are stacked against you, and you really aren't in a position to be doing productive children's ministry if your odds are that skewed. You need to either quit the children's ministry until you have enough help, or you need to go recruit more help. Tell the leader of your ministry, this is not a safe environment. I am not safe. The church is not safe. You are not safe. The kids are not safe. We can't have an environment where the odds are skewed so far that kids are capable of harming each other. So, if you don't want a lawsuit, we need to make recruiting a higher priority. Well, that's all the time I have. Remember, we've talked about what doesn't work. Yelling, threats, punishment, scolding. Don't do that. Preparation and presentation. It's the main event that works the best. Prepare, give them something dynamic, and eliminate those pauses and dead times. For the expectations, make sure that you communicate the schedule, communicate the rules, and communicate the consequences. Then you got to follow through. Remember that broken window theory. You address the little things before they become big things. So address those issues immediately. Don't let it continue. Restate the expectations that were verbalized and smile so it's done in love. Then with the incentives, we said avoid favoritism. Verbal affirmations are incentives. Physical incentives still work. Go ahead and give them candy and toys. It's okay. And token incentives are objects that you can give that represent a later reward that cost you a lot less. And then the exceptions is that kid in which you can delay consequences. You can even bring in the caregiver. And then you have those out of control situations where you can't reason with emotion. You got to get past the emotion first. And once you talk them back down to earth, then you can talk to them. Then the special needs kids where you have to recruit one-on-one or bring in the caregiver or make a space where they fit. And lastly, when you're hitting overwhelming odds, it's time to call in reinforcement or close down the offensive. I hope that these tips helped you in your classroom management. Go out and try them, and I'm sure that you will see improvement in your ministry.
Well, Philip, did you learn something watching that? I don't think you don't have your mic on yet. You turn your mic on. There we go.
Yeah, I actually did learn a little bit while I was preparing it. I learned that not everything I know do I always implement.
Yeah, there was a lot of great content there, and just so that everybody knows, again, if you want to, you can download the notes. A lot of great notes. The notes encapsulate everything that Philip had to say in this. We're not going to take too much longer, but we have a couple of questions that we wanted to ask. Hey, first one, Philip, what if that kid is your own kid? What do you suggest with that? Doing with that kid? Let's maybe take like a younger kid, and then maybe a preschool kid, and then an elementary kid.
Well, I've got the same answer for both because it was my kid.
Okay.
In class, it's exactly the same as you would do with every other child, but you can give them a deferred or delayed consequence later. That you can say, "We will talk about your consequence when we get home." And when I was talking about deferred consequences, that's actually most helpful with your own kids. And maybe add, if you want to make that talk easier on yourself, you might want to change direction now.
Yes.
So I would address it, but you do want to make sure that in front of the other kids, you don't discipline your child differently than the rest of the room. Even if that child needs exceptional attention, you want to make sure that it's the same attention you get of any special needs kids. Otherwise, the room feels like everything's unfair, and observers might not know that they're your child and you have permission to spank them or whatever it is that you do. But if you're treating that kid differently, people notice. And so deferred consequence is the best solution.
So, hey, a question. And I know one of the things that I made it a practice that I think deferred consequences are great. One thing I didn't do is in the classroom is to spank my own child. That's one thing that you don't want to do, even though that they probably might deserve it. Don't do that. But especially in front of other
generally
kids.
You don't want to discipline your own child as a parent when you're sitting in the role of the teacher.
Yeah. So that type of discipline, you want to discipline as a teacher rather than a parent in those scenarios. I get that. Another question.
Or let the other teachers deal with it.
Or let the other teachers deal with it. Yeah. Another question that I had to do. Oh, actually, I have one from Adair here, and I'm going to put that up here. Let's see. This is the one I was wanting to ask. Do you only recommend adults for one-on-one, or can a teenager be that person as well? Especially like when you're dealing with maybe a special needs child or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. A teenager can be that person and be the one-on-one as long as they're not the only teacher. As long as there's other adults in the room. In fact, I've known of other children's pastors who have even used older kids within the class to sit and be that kid's friend and buddy and helper. And it's just a body that can manage that child and give them attention so that the lead teacher doesn't have to stop everything to address every problem. And sometimes that's just, that's an older responsible kid who pays attention. Can you just sit next to her? If she has difficulty listening, just remind her of our rule, And it doesn't have to be formal. It can just be casual in some circumstances. I mean, if there's a severe special need that requires some skill and patience to deal with, yeah, it should probably be an older teenager or a responsible adult. But really, it's anybody who can sit and help that kid keep their focus ahead. And if that's just the goody two-shoes kids that, that obey the rules, that's fine. They might make a friend,
No,
as long as there's other adults in the room.
that's great. One of the things that I've seen in the last, actually, it's been the last 10 years that has been really welcomed by me. My background is in special education. And one of the things that sometimes as teachers, we think that every child needs to act the same way in the class, behave the same way, have the same attention span even in the class. And I've really appreciated the fact that sometimes we have children in our class who are learning, who need maybe a special space, or they need those fidget toys and things like that. A lot of times when I started in kids ministry, that we'd tell kids you can't bring anything into class, and I get sometimes things are a distraction, but for some children they need something to hold on to physically. And so I appreciated your talking about that. That was a welcome. I've seen it happening in a number of classrooms, and welcome that. And that may be new to some people. You want to expound on that a little bit?
Sure. Some kids, I'm one of them, need something to do in order to focus their attention. I'll draw and doodle in the middle of staff meeting with my boss and fellow pastors. I'll just be doodling on my notebook or fidgeting with a card or a coin or something underneath the table, just because I have difficulty focusing if I'm not doing something. So kids sometimes need to pace and walk if they've got ADD. Otherwise, they're going to explode, and you don't want them to explode in the service. So give them a space where they can release that energy in an appropriate way. But I would guard against just letting any kid bring in any toy, because, like you said, it can be a distraction. I taught in seventh grade school one time that brought out a bin of fidget toys and said, "Okay, anybody who needs them, use them." Oh my goodness, was that a terrible idea? They all just started playing with their toys, and none of them listened to a word we said. So it's only the kids that need them. It's like, if you were using that to focus your attention, I would love for you to keep it. But it seems to be more of a distraction that's keeping you from paying attention. Maybe I should hold on to it until after class.
Yeah.
So use it appropriately. And another person asked if every class should have that space, that safe place for kids who need it. And I would say only if the kids need it. I wouldn't create a space in every class for something that's not needed. That's a waste of resources. But if you notice that every class has that kid who just is beside themselves with anxiety because they need to do something, or they can't focus because it's too loud, or whatever it is, you can create spaces for as many kids as need it.
Yeah. And another thing that you brought up, and I really appreciated, was the idea of it is incorporating the caregiver at various times in various situations. Do you have a rule of thumb when you know that maybe you need to talk to the parent or grandparent or whoever the caregiver is? Is there something that is a rule of thumb for you on that?
The general measure I use is whether or not the class is still learning. Like if they're a distraction for a moment, or we've got a 5-minute episode every week, that's not a big deal. If the kid is misbehaving and talking, but in general, it's just something that we manage and the rest of the room can still focus, then I just deal with it in the classroom. If it gets to the point where we can't have class because so-and-so is screaming, or we can't have class because they keep running on stage and taking the microphone, or we can't have class because he's hitting people and we don't have enough teachers to stop him from hitting people, that's when it's like, okay, the class has stopped. We've now ceased to have class, and it's just a group of 6 kids watching the teacher manage one kid's behavior. And that when the entire class stops is basically my measure for when I need to pull it in the guardian.
Yeah. One of the things that I found is oftentimes I could handle the situation or scenario for the moment, but oftentimes afterwards I would bring in the parent and just talk and say, "Hey, this happened in our class. Do you have some ideas to help me with that scenario?" And typically they say, "Hey, I'm dealing with the same thing. What can we do?" And so I've always found that parents almost most of the time are just, they want their children to have a positive experience in your class, and they're going to be your ally, and they're going to want to have things work out as well. So I've always said, incorporate them when you need them, but never shy away from bringing them. It's because they could be part of the solution to that child's
Talking
behavior.
about the issue after class is different than bringing them in to sit with their kid.
Right.
So if
Yep.
I would consult parents that so and so is just for the last 6 weeks he's just been always walking and we can't get him to sit. Is there something we should know, or is a tool that you use to get him to sit down when he needs to? That those kinds of questions are very appropriate, and most parents welcome that kind of question.
Yeah. So there are a few other questions, but we're really running long on time. Philip, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing with us your wisdom. The classroom management is something we can all get better at. And I think the biggest takeaway and everybody needs to know, the number one thing is preparation, preparing your
That's
class.
90% of it.
Yeah, and if you're prepared and if you're ready to go and if you're ready to teach and you have engaging material, classroom discipline is going to be much easier, and the classroom management is going to be much easier. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that we are ready to go. That, if we have a class on Sunday, we're not doing a Saturday night special, getting ready, but just spending the week in prayer, getting things ready for the class, being prepared is one of the things I like to say, but also preparing yourself mentally and with the resources you need, and not just showing up and all of a sudden you're not ready. Those kids are going to they're going to be ready for you. You better be ready for them.
Yeah, someone, I think it was Adair, who asked in the comments how to create a dynamic service, and anything that's visual participatory. You don't have to be a performer to hold toys. You don't have to be a performer. You don't have to do puppets and magic tricks. Just ask the kids to act out the Bible story. Ask them to do something. Give them something to look at. And so if your curriculum doesn't already have something like that included, just ask yourself, what are the kids going to be seeing today? What are they going to be doing today?
Yeah.
Spend just as much time on that as what will they be hearing.
Yeah, and the other thing too is to just be mindful that at different age groups and age levels, there's different expectations of their attention span and what they can
That's
endure.
something I did not address. I probably should have addressed that. Let's address it now, just in a
Okay.
60-second synopsis.
Yeah.
Kids have a 5-minute or less attention span. Whatever research you've heard in the past that allowed them 10 minutes is not true anymore. They cannot listen for more than 5 minutes. So if what you're doing doesn't change every 5 minutes, now that could just be your tone of voice changes, or you pick up a different object, or the story takes a turn where now we're all acting it out, or let's try some hand motions. Would you do this to the verse? Whatever it is, something in the environment or the pace has to change every 5 minutes, or they're just going to get lost and bored.
Wonderful. Yeah. So pay attention to that, because if they're fidgeting and they're going to give you signals that it's time to change, and so just be watching them, because they're going to tell you that it's getting too long in a certain way, and you'll condition yourself to be a better teacher by watching your kids and seeing how they respond to you.
So, the best litmus test is the heads. If the heads are moving, you need to change something, or else you're going to lose them. If the heads are still, they're obviously engaged in whatever's happening. So watch out at the head. If you see a bunch of bobbleheads, quit. Go on to the next thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's okay that you might not be done with the thing you're doing. If it's appropriate, move on to the next thing. Don't continue to make the kids in a position where they're going to cause a problem. So, excellent. Oh, we're grateful to have you with us, Philip, to kick off this first Kidmin Training to Go. We have our next one coming up on March the 8th. We're doing a missions panel and talking about developing a heart of compassion in kids. That's going to be pretty fun. It's going to be a bunch of people on that one. It's going to be led by Jen Hewitt. For those of you that are wondering, everything here is recorded, and churches that are participating in the Kidmin Training to Go will be able to download this in the next couple of days. Well, thanks again for everyone for joining us, and God bless you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send them to us at our office. You can write to me at mark@wnmdag.org, and we'd be glad to answer any of the other questions you may have. Thanks again, Philip. God's blessings to you and to everyone. Blessings.